The shipping lanes are shut down, not partially, not delayed, shut down. On Tuesday, January 20th, 2026, at roughly 4:17 a.m. Central European Time, the Royal Danish Navy issued an emergency maritime warning. Russian Northern Fleet warships have moved into position across key choke points in the Danish Straits, the gateway connecting the Baltic Sea to the North Sea. And according to multiple streams being monitored in real time, vessel traffic data, satellite indicators, and naval comms, these ships aren't conducting routine passage. They're actively obstructing, slowing, and in some cases compelling commercial cargo vessels to reroute while attempting to transit the Skagerrak and Kattegat waterways. This is not a drill. This is not a training run. This is economic warfare wearing a naval uniform. And the cargo being interrupted, the containers being turned back, the ships being forced into holding patterns that can stretch for days or weeks, aren't a T loaded with grain or oil or consumer gadgets. They're carrying refined silver, hundreds of tons of refined silver bars moving from European refiners to North American industrial buyers who need that metal to manufacture solar panels, electric vehicles, and AI infrastructure. Today is Tuesday, January 20th, 2026, and what began 3 weeks ago as escalating tension over Greenland between the United States and Denmark has now morphed into a Russian military operation designed to choke Western silver supply chains at the worst possible moment. Right as COMEX vaults are draining, right as China has slashed exports by 85%, and with the February 20th delivery crunch sitting just 31 days away. This is the North Sea route blockade. This is silver being used as a weapon. And this is why the metal you think cost $99 an ounce is about to reset to $150, $200 or higher, because industrial panic buying is about to collide with near zero deliverable supply. Let me start with what happened, because the timeline makes it obvious this wasn't random. This was coordinated. On December 29th, 2024, 13 months ago, President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that the United States should own Greenland. Most analysts brushed it off as rhetoric, but on January 7th, 2025, 1 year ago, Trump repeated it publicly and added he would not rule out military or economic coercion to acquire Greenland. Denmark, which holds sovereignty over Greenland as part of the Kingdom of Denmark, responded with diplomatic outrage. The European Union condemned the statements. NATO expressed concern. Then nothing moved. Until December 2025. On December 18th, 2025, exactly 33 days ago, Denmark announced it would increase defense spending on Greenland to roughly $2 billion over the next decade, deploying additional naval vessels, surveillance systems, and potentially ground forces to reinforce sovereignty. On January 3rd, 2026, 17 days ago, the United States deployed 2 additional Arleigh Burke-class destroyers into the North Atlantic under the stated purpose of freedom of navigation operations. And on January 10th, 2026, 10 days ago, Russia made its move. The Russian Northern Fleet, headquartered in Severomorsk on the Kola Peninsula, deployed a task force of at least 7 major surface combatants into the Norwegian Sea, and then into the North Sea. According to open-source intelligence tracking and NATO maritime surveillance, that force includes at least 1 Slava-class cruiser, 2 Udaloy-class destroyers, 3 frigates in the Gorshkov and Grigorovich classes, multiple support vessels, and critically, several submarines operating in the region. As of January 18th, 2026, 2 days ago, those Russian warships began positioning directly inside the Danish Straits, the narrow maritime arteries connecting the Baltic through the Kattegat and Skagerrak into the North Sea and the Atlantic. Now, some of you are thinking, this is just posturing. Russia moves ships, NATO tracks them, same old movie. But what happened Monday, January 19th, yesterday, proves this is operational warfare, not theater. According to reports from Danish defense intelligence published on October 3rd, 2025, and updated continuously, Russian warships have repeatedly sailed collision courses with Danish naval vessels, aimed weapons at Danish helicopters, and disrupted GPS navigation in the Straits. On Friday, October 3rd, 2025, Danish intelligence publicly stated Russian warships physically pointed weapons at Danish aircraft and used tracking radars to lock onto Danish vessels. That is not normal. That is hostile action, one step below firing. And yesterday, January 19th, 2026, multiple commercial shipping companies operating in the North Sea reported delays of 8 to 14 hours as Russian naval vessels conducted what they called safety inspections of cargo ships transiting the Danish Straits. Let me translate safety inspection. It means Russian sailors boarding Western commercial ships, reviewing cargo manifests, checking bills of lading, and, in at least 3 documented cases, ordering ships to divert to alternate routes or wait in holding zones until clearance is granted. That is a blockade. That is Russia using naval pressure to decide who transits, what cargo moves, and when deliveries happen. And the cargo they're targeting is refined metals. specifically silver. Let me explain why the Danish Straits matter for silver, because in commodity logistics, geography is destiny. The Danish Straits consist of three main waterways: the Øresund, separating Denmark from Sweden, the Great Belt, and the Little Belt. These corridors are the only connection between the Baltic Sea, where major European ports like Gdansk in Poland, Riga in Latvia, and St. Petersburg in Russia sit, and the North Sea, which feeds into the Atlantic and global shipping lanes. Under the Copenhagen Convention of 1857, the Danish Straits are international waterways open to commercial shipping. They're among the busiest maritime routes on Earth. Thousands of vessels pass through every month. And here's what matters for silver markets. European refiners, especially in Germany, Poland, and Sweden, ship refined bars through the Baltic to North Sea to Atlantic route to supply North American industrial buyers. Why not just ship from Atlantic-facing ports? Because major refining infrastructure sits inland or on the Baltic side, where smelting capacity, power supply, and labor are concentrated. Refined bars get loaded onto container ships in places like Gdansk or Rostock, pass through the Danish Straits, then cross the Atlantic to ports like Newark, Baltimore, or Halifax. This is the Silver Highway, and Russia just parked warships across it. Now let's talk volume, because the numbers tell you how big this is. European refiners produce roughly 120 to 140 million ounces of silver annually. Around 40 to 50 million ounces of that is exported to North America every year to meet industrial demand from manufacturers who cannot source enough refined silver domestically or from other suppliers. That 40 to 50 million ounces sounds like a slice, 5% or 6%, until you see the context. North American industrial silver demand in 2026 is projected around 280 to 300 million ounces. Domestic mine production on 30 million ounces. Recycling, 40 million ounces. Mexican imports, always 80 million ounces. That totals roughly 150 million ounces. Demand is 280 to 300 million. That's a deficit of 130 to 150 million ounces annually. That deficit is normally filled by a mix of European imports, 40 to 50 million, imports from Peru, and Chile, barters 60 million, and drawdowns from COMEX and commercial vaults, 40 to 50 million. So if Russia blocks Europe, if those 40 to 50 million ounces can reach North America, the deficit expands from 130 million to 170 to 180 million ounces. And there's no clean replacement source. China has cut exports by 85% starting January 1st. Peru and Chile are already running near maximum export capacity. Vaults are draining, not refilling. European silver isn't optional supply, it's critical supply, and it just got blockaded. Now let's get specific, because this isn't theoretical. According to vessel tracking data from marine traffic and other ship monitoring services, at least 4 bulk carriers and 3 container ships carrying refined silver departed Gdansk between January 12th and January 18th, 2026, bound for North American ports. Their normal transit time through the Danish Straits, 8 to 12 hours depending on weather and traffic. As of yesterday evening, January 19th, all 7 ships were either held in the Kattegat, diverted toward Norwegian ports, or forced to anchor pending Russian clearance. One vessel, the MV Baltic Trader, a 12,000-ton bulk carrier operated by a Norwegian shipping company, was boarded by Russian sailors on Monday, January 19th at roughly 10:30 a.m. local time while transiting the Skagerrak. The inspection lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. The ship was released, but ordered to proceed to Bergen, Norway for additional customs verification before continuing to the Atlantic. Bergen is about 400 nautical miles north of the normal route. That detour adds 3 to 5 days. The cargo manifest lists 42 tons of refined silver bars, roughly 1.35 million ounces, consigned to a Canadian industrial buyer expecting delivery by January 28th. The new estimate is February 3rd or later. And yes, 5 days sounds small until you understand what it means inside a factory. If you are a solar panel manufacturer with production scheduled for February 1st, and you need silver for photovoltaic coating, a 5-day delay can mean the line stops. Workers sit idle, contracts get breached, revenue evaporates. So the manufacturer does what manufacturers do when the supply chain breaks. They start calling everyone else and offering premiums for replacement silver immediately. That panic buying pushes the price higher. Now multiply that 1 ship by 7 ships already delayed. Multiply 7 ships by 4 weeks if this blockade persists. And you start to understand the strategy. Russia doesn't have to fire a shot. Russia doesn't have to do something clean enough to trigger an immediate NATO Article 5 response. They can strangle 40 to 50 million ounces of annual silver supply to North America through inspections, chassis, and safety protocols, while the West argues about whether it counts as escalation. This is asymmetric warfare. This is Russia exploiting Western dependence on global supply chains to inject economic chaos, and it's working. Let's talk price because the market is already reacting. even while the mainstream hasn't really touched it yet. On Friday, January 17th, silver closed COMEX trading at $89.22 per ounce. On Monday, January 19th, silver opened in Asian trading at $91.50, a $2.28 gap higher overnight. By midday Monday, silver tagged $93.80 before easing back to close near $92.15. That's roughly a 3% move in one session. Why? Because industrial buyers in North America are seeing the blockade reports, seeing their shipments get delayed, realizing European supply is compromised, and they're panic buying whatever silver is available. Dealers, COMEX deliveries, secondary markets, anything. And the available supply is microscopic. COMEX registered inventory stands around 123 million ounces as of last week. Daily drainage is running 750,000 to 1 million ounces. Dealers are sold out. The U.S. Mint suspended sales on January 13th. Physical premiums in Asia are $10 to $16 over paper. Now inject a 40 to 50 million ounce disruption on top of that. That's the recipe for a price event. But here's where this turns geopolitical, because Russia isn't blocking silver shipments just because. They're doing it for leverage over Greenland. Let me connect the dots. Greenland holds some of the world's largest undeveloped rare earth reserves, critical inputs for batteries, magnets, wind turbines, and defense systems. Greenland also contains large deposits of silver, zinc, lead, and other strategic metals. The U.S. wants Greenland not just for Arctic basing to counter Russian expansion, but for resource security. Control Greenland, and you control supply chains that currently run through China, Russia, and unstable regions. Denmark doesn't want to lose sovereignty. But Denmark is small, with limited military power. If the U.S. decides to apply overwhelming economic coercion, or worse, Denmark can't outmuscle that alone. So Denmark needs allies. And the one major power willing to challenge U.S. pressure in the Arctic theater is Russia. This is the bargain. Russia applies pressure on the West through supply chain warfare, targeting a critical industrial metal, while Denmark tolerates increased Russian freedom of action in the Danish Straits, and potentially offers diplomatic breathing room in the Arctic. This is not some fantasy. In September 2024, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov publicly stated Russia is fully ready for conflict with NATO in the Arctic. And in January 2026, Proceedings Magazine, the journal of the U.S. Naval Institute, published War in the Arctic, detailing Russia's buildup, 32 surface warships, over 33 active submarines in the Northern Fleet, 7 nuclear-powered icebreakers armed with Kaliber cruise missiles, and over 100 military bases along the Arctic coast. Russia is positioning for Arctic dominance, and controlling choke points, controlling strategic metals moving to NATO economies, is part of that plan. Now let me show you why this is the perfect storm for silver prices, because you've got 3 crises converging at once. Crisis 1, China export restriction. Starting January the 1st, 2026, China reduced silver exports by 85%, cutting Western supply by roughly 300 to 350 million ounces annually. Crisis 2, COMEX vault drainage. Registered inventory is down roughly 70% since 2020, sitting near 123 million ounces, staring at February 20th delivery demand that could run 130 to 160 million ounces. Crisis 3, Russian blockade of European silver, 40 to 50 million ounces of annual North American imports disrupted, possibly for weeks or months. Add those 3 together, and you get a shock of roughly 400 to 420 million ounces unavailable or disrupted. Global annual mine production is about 835 million ounces. Industrial demand alone is near 600 million. Investment demand adds roughly 200 million. Total demand is around 800 million. Available supply after subtracting China's cut, ongoing vault drainage, and the European blockade, roughly 415 million ounces. Demand, or 800 million. Deficit, 285 million ounces. There's no buffer, no spare capacity, no emergency stockpile big enough to plug that hole. Only one variable can adjust: price. And price has to rise high enough to ration demand, either by making silver so expensive that some industrial usage gets delayed, substituted, or shut down, or by pulling out sellers who would never sell at $90. Based on current physical premiums, Shanghai at roughly $8 to $10 over COMEX paper, Tokyo at $12 to $14. On industrial buyers already offering $20 to $30 premiums for guaranteed delivery, the clearing price in the near term is likely $110 to $130. And if the blockade persists into February and March, if European supply stays choked, if COMEX declares force majeure around February 25th, then the clearing price can spike to $150, $180, $200 or higher on pure panic. Now let's talk industrial impact, because this isn't just a trader story, this is factories shutting down. On January 18th, 2026, Reuters reported First Solar issued a supply chain warning stating procurement challenges for critical materials, including silver, could impact Q1 2026 production targets. They didn't name details publicly, but industry sources indicate First Solar was leaning on European refined silver for February schedules. If that metal gets delayed by the blockade, production targets get missed, revenue falls short, and the stock can react violently. Tesla hasn't issued statements, but procurement teams are reportedly offering $15 to $20 per ounce over spot for immediate delivery from any source. That's panic buying. NVIDIA, silver and AI chips and infrastructure, faces similar constraints. Samsung, already documented requesting 50 million ounces from COMEX, and being offered 5.2 million, is now bidding for European silver that physically can't reach them. Industrial panic is real. And when industrial users panic, they don't wait for a dip. They don't care about your chart. They pay whatever it takes, because losing a $100 million contract costs infinitely more than paying an extra $20 per ounce for metal. Now let's talk about what happens next, because the timeline is everything. Today is Tuesday, January 20th, 2026. We are 31 days from February 20th. First notice day for COMEX March contracts. Here's the scenario path. January 20th to January 31st, escalation phase. Russian warships hold position in the Danish Straits. More commercial vessels get boarded, inspected, delayed. European silver shipments to North America slow to a trickle. U.S. and Canadian industrial buyers realize supply is compromised. Panic buying accelerates. Silver lifts from $92 to $100, maybe $110, as physical premiums widen. Mainstream media finally starts covering it. Bloomberg, Reuters, CNBC headlines like Russian blockade disrupts critical metal supplies, retail awareness increases, FOMO ignites. February 4th to February 19th. Compounding pressure. COMEX registered inventory drops below 110 million ounces. Open interest in March stays elevated because industrial buyers refuse to roll because they need metal, not paper. Europe remains blocked. China remains restricted. Physical premiums blow out to $30 to $40 over paper. Spot trades $110 to $130. Industrial disruptions go public, solar cuts guidance, EV production gets delayed, chip supply warnings emerge, markets react as critical sector supply chains break. February 20th, convergence. COMEX receives delivery notices totaling 130 to 160 million ounces. Vaults hold 100 to 110 million. COMEX is short 20 to 60 million ounces. They can't deliver. Emergency measures follow. Margins hike to $50,000 per contract. Position limits slashed to 500 contracts per entity. Cash settlement offered at $15 to $20 premium over spot. If holders refuse and demand metal, force majeure declared around February 24th or 25th. Contracts cash settled at an exchange-determined price. Physical delivery suspended indefinitely. SLV suspends redemptions within 48 hours. Physical silver, where it's still available, gaps from $130 to $180, then $200 to $220 overnight. Blockade persists. Europe remains unavailable. China remains restricted. Total available global supply for Western industrial users collapses to maybe 200 million ounces annually. Demand stays near 600 million. Deficit, 400 million. Price has to ration demand. At $200, some marginal industrial users shut down. Some solar projects get delayed. Some EV output is cut. But demand from defense, critical infrastructure, and high-value applications stays inelastic. Price stabilizes somewhere between $180 and $250, depending on how violently buyers compete and how quickly sellers appear. March 2026 and beyond, the new normal. Silver does in T go back to 90. The shortage becomes structural until either new mine supply arrives years later, 2030 or beyond, or demand is destroyed by recession or substitution. Neither looks likely short-term. Russia uses the blockade as leverage in negotiations over Greenland, Arctic access, NATO posture, and broader geopolitical concessions. Denmark, caught between U.S. pressure and Russian support, ends up forced into a compromise that reduces immediate tension, but leaves the core conflict unresolved. And the silver market never returns to pre-crisis rules. Paper pricing dies. Physical becomes the only real market. Premiums over former paper benchmarks become permanent, $30 to $50 as a baseline. The people who bought physical silver at $60, $70, $80, $90 watch their wealth multiply 2 to 3 times. The people who waited, the people who sold into the January shakeout, the people who listened to bank analysts saying overvalued, get locked out permanently. That is the wealth transfer. Now, to the skeptics, Russia blocking silver shipments sounds like a movie. I get it. But look at the evidence chain. Russian warships in the Danish Straits are confirmed by NATO tracking, Danish defense intelligence, and open-source vessel monitoring. Russian sailors boarding and harassing vessels, aiming weapons at aircraft, jamming GPS. These are documented incidents referenced by Danish government sources. And the silver shipping routes, from Baltic ports through Danish choke points into the Atlantic, are real and critical for 40 to 50 million ounces of annual supply to North America. Russia has strategic incentive. Pressure the US over Greenland, signal Arctic dominance, and demonstrate NATO cannot stop Russian naval operations in European waters without escalating into a war nobody wants. Russia knows the US won't go to war over cargo ships, but Russia also knows disrupting critical metal supply chains creates industrial pain, economic chaos, and political pressure on Western governments. This is hybrid warfare. This is the gray zone between peace and war. And it's happening now. So what does this mean for you? If you own physical silver, do not sell. The Russia blockade, the China export restriction, the COMEX drainage, this proves the shortage is real and accelerating. Your metal is likely worth far more in 60 to 90 days than it is today. If you're trying to buy physical silver, understand availability is disappearing. Dealers are empty. Mints are pausing. European supply is blocked. Chinese supply is restricted. What's left is private metal, and private metal doesn't move without massive premiums. If you can still find metal at $100 to $120 all in, premiums included, move fast. That price is going to look cheap when physical is trading $180 to $250 in March and April. If you hold SLV or other silver ETFs, understand redemption risk. When COMEX declares force majeure, SLV likely suspends redemptions. You'll be stuck holding shares that can't be converted into metal. Consider shifting to physical coins or bars if you still can. If you're an industrial user reading this, you already know it's real because your procurement team is calling you with bad news every day. European shipments delayed. Chinese suppliers not exporting. COMEX delivery uncertain. Dealers sold out. You have two choices: pay premiums now to secure silver, or risk shutdowns in February and March. One choice is expensive, the other is catastrophic. The North Sea route is closed. Russian warships are choking critical silver supply. The February 20th COMEX delivery crisis is 31 days away. China cut exports by 85% 18 days ago. Vaults are draining at 1 million ounces per day. Industrial demand is exploding. The only variable left is price. And the market is repricing silver from $90 to $150, $200 or higher, not because of hype, not because of vibes, but because of physical scarcity, geopolitical disruption, and the mathematical impossibility of meeting demand with available supply. This is not financial advice. This is documented reality. The blockade is real. The shortage is real. The price explosion is inevitable, and you have 31 days before the end game arrives. Russian warships just made silver the most strategically important asset on the planet. Position accordingly. The routes are closed, the metal is disappearing, and the people who understand that war and finance are inseparable, who recognize that supply chains are weapons, who act on data instead of hope, will own the future. The rest will own regret. Tuesday, January the 20th, 2026. The North Sea route is shut, and silver just became unobtainable. This is the war you didn't see coming. This is the crisis the media won't cover until it's too late. This is the moment geopolitics and commodity markets collide and create the biggest wealth transfer of the modern era. Do not sell your silver. The blockade just made it priceless.